God, school is so hard.
Nerd.
Wow, you're such a nerd. You're really doing work right now? What a nerd.
I'll
Yeah,
give you guys
punk.
a box of donuts if you help me out.
I don't know, man. I don't know. How many's in there?
12.
All right. We'll help you out. All right.
Well, my study guide has a bunch of questions on it that must be answered. For starters, could you guys describe the significance of steel, electricity, and railroads during the Industrial Revolution?
Yeah, that's pretty easy. I can definitely tell you that. I'll start with the significance of steel. During the Industrial Revolution, steel was a much stronger and more durable metal than iron. It was also cheaper to manufacture. Because of this, trains and cars were able to carry more goods and were able to be moved at a quicker pace. Steel was also used to build other things such as cars and skyscrapers, which was a major change during this time period.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I also know a thing or two about steel. You know, steel was able to benefit the environment as it caused low amounts of carbon emission. Steel was also the builder for the infrastructures of all major urban cities. Bridges, factories, and railroads were also built from steel and steel was also used in many household appliances and cars.
Those are great answers, guys. Ryan, do you know about the significance of electricity?
Well, in my opinion, electricity was the most significant advancement during the Second Industrial Revolution. Electricity gave relatively cheap and safe lighting for people's homes. Before the invention of electricity, homes were lit by candles or oil lamps, and this lighting was extremely dim and had a terrible, long-lasting smell that wasn't very appealing. As the demand for electricity grew, engineers learned to use water power to produce electricity, and hydroelectric plants were built.
So what you're saying is the overall effect of Industrial Revolution transformed economies that have been based on agriculture and handicrafts into economies based on large-scale industry, mechanized manufacturing, and the factory system. New machines, new power sources, and new ways of organizing work made existing industries more productive and efficient.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The invention of electricity unfortunately affected the environment by increasing the emissions of greenhouse gases and other air pollutants, especially when a fuel is burned.
You know, the invention of electricity created jobs for workers, contributed to the wealth of the nation, increased the production of goods, which eventually led to a raised standard of living, shorter hours, and a better working conditions for many people.
Thank you guys for the great answers so far.
Yeah, I mean, I really could go for some donuts right now, so I'll finish this question off with talking on the significance of railroads. The invention of the railroads were very essential as they became a way for companies to ship to each other from across the country, transport raw materials to factories, and send final products to new consumers. Not only did the railway system grow due to the flourishing businesses, but corporations now expanded as well due to the growth of the railway system. In terms of the economy though, railways played a major role in integrating markets and increasing trade. It also encouraged rapid railway development and massively increased the nation's industrialization.
Well, that's pretty good. I know the second question the same way I know the logistics of Fortnite Battle Royale.
Well, that clip was pretty good, but back to you, Ari.
Let's get back to work. I'll tell you about the advancements in communication and transportation. The advancements in communication and transportation affected migration during the 19th century because of the creation of innovative inventions like the railroads, steam-powered locomotives, and more. The advancements in transportation allowed for people to travel from the countryside to the city much more efficiently. These people wanted to migrate immediately, as many were looking to avoid poverty, a rapidly growing population, and the displacement of peasant farming and artisan manufacturing. Furthermore, it also allowed people to better sustain life by finding work and also getting out of poor working conditions, terrible housing, and poor sanitation.
You know, transportation was extremely cheap, especially by railroads and steamships. These ways of transportation quickly allowed for people to travel for the enormous demand for labor and the availability of land overseas. This huge migration obviously had many after effects as it caused Europe to increase its share of the world's population, and by 1930, they represented over 11% of the world's population. Communication also affected the way of migration as it allowed for people to move from place to place and find jobs more easily.
Thanks for the add-on. Who wants to talk on how industrialization of the US and Russia were similar and different?
I think I'll take on that one. Well, the industrialization efforts of the United States were very similar to the efforts of Russia, as both industrial workers had long hours and poor conditions, while living in poor housing. In both Russia and the United States, the social classes both moved apart from wealthy, poor, and middle class. These social classes both had major distinctions, and women worked in both industrial revolutions. Although unions were not allowed in Russia, there were attempts, similar to the unions in the United States, for better working conditions, hours, and wages. Russia was successful in the Industrial Revolution because of Russia's iron smelting. Russia became the main exporter of cast iron in Europe. Russia also had noticeable growth in the textile industry, which helped the economy.
You know, on the other hand, the United States was pretty successful during the Industrial Revolution, mainly due to the railway system, which helped promote industries like coal and steel. The railway system also sped up the transportation of materials to markets, which encouraged mass production.
It's very interesting you say that because I never thought about it like that.
Well, you learn something new every day, buddy.
You're right. Ryan, you've been pretty quiet. Let's break the ice by you telling me how socialism emerged as a reaction to capitalism.
Man, that's light work. Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole, while capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. In the beginning, socialism thinkers first started because of the way that they had been treated because of the capitalist ideals. Socialist thinkers started to believe in a principle called mutualism. Mutualism is the doctrine that mutual dependence is necessary to social well-being.
That's pretty cool. But let's go over the reaction of women's suffrage, labor movements, and public education to industrialization.
Well, I think I know a lot about that. Industrialization had many social effects on the women as they began to have an increasing role in society, working in factories, coal mines, or as domestic workers. This came with many downsides, however, as women were paid much less and forced to work in hazardous conditions. Women began to become dissatisfied with their home life, and some began volunteer or social work with little to no pay. Women even began to challenge male domination of politics and law, and women's suffrages began to demand the right to vote. In 1897, the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies was created and worked for the right of the middle-class women to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony led the women's suffrage movements in the United States, and by 1914, they had won the right to vote in 12 states.
Oh boy, John Wilson, you really know your stuff about women's suffrage. But did you know that industrialization also had major effects on public education, as education was accessible by people of all economic backgrounds and laws were put into place to demand public education for all kids? Prior to the Industrial Revolution, education was not free, and poor children often missed out on education and were sent to work in factories. The government then allocated funds to promote education in schools and established laws for children working in factories to attend school for at least 2 hours every day. In 1844, the government established Ragsdales Union, focused on educating poor children, while the Public Schools Act, created in 1868, brought reform to the public school system by establishing basic requirements for educational standards.
Wow, I had no idea. I know for a fact you guys didn't know that industrialization impacted labor movements, as many workers were forced to work many hours in very hazardous conditions for very little pay. Labor unions were then created that fought for better wages, reasonable hours, and better working conditions. Workers began to unite to create friendly societies for mutual assistance in time of illness, unemployment, or disability. Laws were then made that forbade workers to strike, but labor unions still fought to improve working conditions, increase wages, and work for insurances against illnesses and old age. By the end of the 19th century, British labor unions counted 2 million members, and German and American unions have 1 million members each. Labor unions also strove to enable workers to share in the benefits of a capitalist economy.
All right, that was a lot of information.
Yeah.
How about we discuss the ways that industrialization impacted imperialism in the 19th century?
Well, first, we have to know what imperialism is. Imperialism is a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force?
Thanks for that, John Wilson. I think I can help answer this one. Due to the quick economic growth and new advancements in technology, population growth was on the rise. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain due to the geographic conditions. Soon after that, industrialization spread around the world throughout Europe and the United States. These countries began mass production, which meant they needed more raw goods. These industrialized nations began to utilize cheap labor and natural resources to maximize profits, which then led to imperialism. During the 19th century, 1/4 of the world's land was distributed among 12 countries. The goal of these countries was to gain the best natural resources to fuel their factories. Countries that didn't industrialize were quickly overtaken by the countries that did industrialize, as they were seen as weak.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. I don't know about you guys, but I'm still kind of confused on how imperialism works. Do you think you have anything to help me?
I actually happen to have a picture to help you better understand. The picture was first shown on March 16, 1899. The picture shows how industrial powers exploited smaller powers. In the picture, it shows a white man standing on his subjects. This picture is referred to as an anthem of imperialism because it shows how powerful nations took over the weaker nations.
Great up.
That's a pretty cool picture. I think I know some more info on Great Britain. Great Britain is the best example of an industrial power turning towards imperialism. Great Britain was the first country to industrialize, which led them to imperialism. There were more demands for products, population growth, quick economic growth, and a new sense of nationalism in Great Britain. This helped them take over lots of land, including what is now Canada, India, Australia, South Africa, parts of the African coast, and many islands in the Caribbean.
Thank you guys so much for helping me out. By the way, here are your donuts.
Oh my God.
Let's go!
There's two
Bro,
donuts. There's
scam
two
us?
donuts. What the heck?